I understand there's a popular sporting event on later this afternoon, so I'll try to keep my remarks brief. I'm just kidding, it's not till 5:30, I'm good. I actually grew up across the river from Cincinnati, where the Reds, and someone mentioned earlier, the Big Red Machine were the popular game in town. The current incarnation of the Bengals was founded and began playing when I was in early elementary school. So as the segue into my sermon, I'll simply point out that while Bengal tigers are not mentioned in the Bible, rams are, but only in the context of getting slaughtered. I had been asked to talk about care of the earth as part of our Reimagining Care series. Then I realized tomorrow is St. Valentine's Day. I thought about and looked up the various words the ancient Greeks used to differentiate between the diverse kinds of love. Now, many ministers have a sermon waxing poetic on the at least 6 different conceptual forms and distinct words Greek philosophy had for love. Now, I had hoped to find that at least one described a love of the environment so that I would have a clever tie-in, but they almost exclusively refer to other people when describing different kinds of what we call simply love. Now, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going over all these variations, but I do want to lift up just a few of them to show those of you who aren't familiar with the ways that they differ. Philia is described as an affectionate regard or friendship. In a concept developed by Aristotle, it's a dispassionate, virtuous love, expressed as loyalty to friends, family, and community. Now, far less dispassionate is eros, meaning love as sexual passion, lust, and pleasure. Now, you no doubt know the English word erotic, meaning arousing sexual desire, so Google eros at your own peril. The Athenian philosopher Plato refined his own definition. He believed that with contemplation, the eros felt for a person becomes an appreciation for the beauty within that person, or even an appreciation for beauty itself. Now, since Plato didn't write of somatic desirability being a necessary part of love, the word platonic came to mean without physical attraction. Now, back when I was in high school and president of our youth group at church, I remember the phrase agape feast being popular, coming from the phrase used for a communal meal shared among Christians. For us, it just meant a potluck. Agape is selfless, universal love, a boundless compassion and infinite empathy that is extended to everyone, whether they are family members or distant strangers. The word agape is also used by Christians to express the unconditional love of God for humankind. And one source I looked at described it as the love for God, strangers, or nature. Nature. Finally, I found an object for the sentence love for other than people or God. Agape as love for nature. Agape as the love for and by God, as well as for nature, reminded me, and I'm sure I'm in the minority here, of pantheism, and it led me to begin thinking of a way we can reimagine caring for the earth. Pantheism is the belief that reality is identical with divinity, that God is the transcendent reality, and the material universe and human beings are only manifestations. Pantheistic concepts go back thousands of years and have been identified not only in Western culture, but also in South and East Asian religions, including Sikhism, Hinduism, Confucianism, and Taoism. The author of our second reading this morning, Alice Walker, wrote, How anyone cannot see that nature is God is amazing to me. That they'd rather worship something that can only exist, really, in their minds. Those whose beliefs align with this thinking will be quick to realize why our care of nature is imperative. Because it's the same as caring for ourselves, others, and the divine. Now, it would be difficult to give a UU sermon about nature without mentioning the Transcendentalist movement. This philosophical movement developed in the early 1800s and was closely identified with Unitarians in New England. A core belief is in the inherent goodness of people and nature. Transcendentalists are sometimes described as pantheistic, but I would think it would be more accurate, if a label's even necessary, to use the term panentheistic. It's a very similar word, but that one two-letter syllable makes quite a difference. While pantheism maintains that the divine and the universe are identical, panentheism says the divine and non-divine are quite different. Panentheism says that while God is greater than the universe, the universal spirit is present everywhere. And it both infuses and transcends all created things. In his journal, Thoreau wrote, "Nature is full of genius, full of the divinity." Now, as a young man, Henry David Thoreau met Ralph Waldo Emerson, who introduced him to a circle of local writers and thinkers, including William Ellery Channing, Margaret Fuller, and Nathaniel Hawthorne. Our first reading this morning was by Emerson, essayist, philosopher, and one-time Unitarian minister. In that reading from Nature, Emerson emphasizes the transcendental belief in the holistic power of the natural landscape. In this excerpt from the same essay, he describes the interconnected quality. A leaf, a drop, a crystal, a moment of time is related to the whole and partakes of the perfection of the whole. Each particle is a microcosm and faithfully renders the likeness of the world. So intimate is this unity that, it is easily seen, it lies under the undermost garment of nature and betrays its source in the universal spirit. It is like a great circle on a sphere, comprising all possible circles, which, however it may be drawn, and comprise it in like manner. Now, as well as believing in the inherent goodness of people and nature, Transcendentalists saw divine experience inherent in the everyday rather than believing in a distant heaven, which sounds familiar. This corresponds to their gratitude and appreciation for nature, not just as a cool place to hang out like Thoreau did, but as a way to observe and understand the way the natural world works, like Thoreau did. So it's evident why care of the earth and the conservation of the natural world was important to them. Their idealism gave them an inherent skepticism of capitalism, westward expansion, and industrialization. When we look at the relatively minor desecration of nature they were witnessing, their words may strike us as quaint today. For instance, the journalist and women's rights advocate, Margaret Fuller, wrote that the noble trees are gone already from this island to feed this cauldron. And in Walden, Thoreau described the train spreading across the continent as a winged horse or fiery dragon that sprinkles all the restless men and floating merchandise in the country for seed. In his journal, he exclaims, "Thank God men cannot as yet fly and lay waste the sky as well as the earth. One can't help but wonder how horrified they might be at what we've done since their time." Which leads me to ask, If our task is to reimagine care of the earth, how have we been caring for the earth up to this point? Well, let's answer that by looking at the three things the transcendentalists were skeptical of: capitalism, westward expansion, and industrialization. If it's been a while since you took a history class, let me remind you why these things may have been on their minds. At the time, Americans were in the midst of the first industrial revolution, seeing firsthand the social and economic move from an agrarian society to an industrial society. Fewer people lived on and worked on farms, and more lived in cities and worked in factories. This frequently meant increased pollution from industries heavily dependent on fossil fuels. Meanwhile, settlers continued their travels west in search of land and prosperity. Many of you may recall the term manifest destiny from elementary school history class. It was a widely held belief in 19th century United States that American settlers were entitled to conquer and control North America. Well, of course, contemporary historians now condemn manifest destiny as a thinly veiled excuse to kill and steal the land of Native Americans. Now, there are, of course, different kinds of capitalist societies around the world, from liberating to exploitative, often indicated by the existence of or lack of workers' rights. In America, one might draw a clear line of connection from the maximize profits by any means possible use of chattel slavery, to the rise of 19th century robber barons, to the decline of labor unions, to today, when the U.S. has the highest level of income inequality among its industrialized peers. So, given the transcendentalist agape love for God, strangers, and nature, and their belief in the inherent goodness of both people and nature, you can probably understand why these three things especially were concerns of theirs. And perhaps see how the consumer culture and resulting pollution from an industrialized society, the taking over of lands where there are chances to gain wealth, and the exploiting of workers by the rich continues to be very real problems for both people and the planet. Emerson, Fuller, and Thoreau saw firsthand not only these concerns become more and more problematic, they saw how our faith tradition began expanding from its liberal Protestant and Congregationalist traditions. It's not uncommon to hear people say, "We take the Bible seriously, but not literally." Our acknowledgement and appreciation in the wisdom of many faith traditions may have actually had early roots in the Transcendentalist movement. It emerged from English and German Romanticism and the work of German philosophers, and was strongly influenced by Hindu texts of philosophy, of the mind, and of spirituality, especially the Upanishads. But more traditional Christian believers, then and now, read the Bible more literally. The first chapter of Genesis tells us, "Then God said, 'Let us make mankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth.'" Well, besides the fact that God was using they, them pronouns, which I addressed in my Pride sermon, this leads us to think carefully about the concept of dominion. We, as you use, more typically think of it as a responsibility to help those fish and birds and cattle and wild animals flourish. Because we have seen how interpreting dominion as to subdue or to rule over has led to not only exploitation but oppression. I can't help but wonder if the factories and pollution, the belief by a few that they are entitled to any land they want to own, and the profits above people mentality aren't direct results of the belief by some that they have dominion over and are owners of, not stewards of, or partners with the earth and her inhabitants. Now, I talked earlier about pantheism and panentheism, beliefs that the divine is either identical with the reality or different but infusing and transcending all created things. I suggested this could quickly lead us to the conclusion our care of the earth is not only morally imperative, but necessary because caring for nature is part and parcel of caring for ourselves, those we love, and those who will come after us. While I don't remember talking about either pantheism or panentheism in a sermon before, I have mentioned process theology. And while those first two suggest that we reimagine care of the earth as stewardship rather than ownership, I'm going to extrapolate that the third suggests that we can reimagine care of the earth as a partnership. In process theology, it's believed that God affects and is affected by temporal processes, which is just another way of saying God relates to us moment by moment in our context. In this theology, we are a universe of free choosers. God exercises relational power, not unilateral control, and so relates to us where we are in our context. Because we are free to choose here and now, God doesn't know in advance what all will happen. We choose and God responds. This sets us up to partner with the divine, to respect and make the right choices, to care for our planet and one another, to become a collaborator in healing the earth, not act as the sole owner. No, not even the owner, like a bad tenant, a renter who pulls down the woodwork to burn in the fireplace and fills the back bedroom with empty pizza boxes and beer cans. So I hear you asking, how do we put into action this reimagined care of the earth, becoming a steward or a partner in helping to heal her? By embracing a universal, unconditional, agape love of the earth that transcends and persists regardless of circumstance. We do this by taking tangible and concrete steps. Hundreds of years ago, as I've described, our theological ancestors modeled it for us, both advocating for the earth and taking personal steps to be more conscientious and caring. What today we might call reducing our carbon footprint. And for decades, we in this church at the corner of Southmore and Fannin have done the same. And you can today. You can join our climate action team in the Green Revolution. These teams sponsor hands-on activities and advocate at the city, state, and national level. They're letting the government and corporations who can make big changes know how passionate we are, how important this is, and how many of us feel this way. Join them and us in making personal changes in our homes and lives. Join with nonprofits who can influence both those big changes and those personal changes. And you can even take some concrete steps before leaving today. In the words of environmental activist Wendell Berry, "What I stand for is what I stand on." There's a Green Revolution table in the courtyard. Stop by it on your way out. You can read about the many activities coming up in the next weeks and months, there or in the email newsletter, and plan to be a part of them. You can also make a pledge to reduce your negative impact on the earth. Find the giant foot display in the courtyard, determine how you're going to reduce your own carbon footprint, write it on a leaf, then add your own personal green leaf to all the others. It is important, and there are lots of things we can do to make a difference, together and as individuals. Join with us to help make an impact. Amen.